cell phone, I tend to use it to look at the news a lot. You know, the economy, whatever free foods dietitians are telling us to throw out, whatever crazy political stuff is going on. And occasionally I'll find an article about famines in Yemen, or the Mexican drug war, or corruption in Venezuela. And I find that 9 times out of 10, I'm not doing that. It was only later that I discovered this avoidance of humanitarian disasters, and I began to wonder why. Simple enough, I was tired of it. But I looked into it further, and I found that there was a whole field of study on the effect I observed by simply reading through news headlines. Let's start with a simple experiment that might help you better understand the premise of what I'm talking about. For the purpose of this, let's use the Syrian civil war. So just pay attention to the screen. Okay, number 1. Since its start in 2011, the Syrian civil war has caused 400,000 deaths. Okay, number 2. The top photo is of Alan Kurdi, who is a 3-year-old refugee child who later died when fleeing to Greece, fleeing the violence of Syria. His story caused international outrage, and there was even a Wikipedia article about it. Following the viral spread of this story on the internet, Google searches actually indicated a spike in interest in the Syrian civil war as a whole, yet media attention died down quickly after. Now let's take a look at the following video. Okay, so that was just a short video clip. And obviously this video showed some imagery and video clips from the daily lives of Syrian refugees. Now, these clips were posted by the British Broadcasting Company in 2013, and the Syrian crisis has lasted far longer than 33 months when they posted it in 2013. But I hope the principle I'm trying to demonstrate still stands. So after all this, my goal is to have you guys question your understanding and your perception, and just ask, which of the 3 examples had the most profound effect? And I think for obvious reasons, the majority of you will say the 3rd one and possibly the 2nd one. What I want to delve into is why this is true. Was it to do with the type of visual that I used, or the volume of suffering that desensitized us, or is it something more primitive and instinctual? Well, you've all heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you look into human history, the truth is that humans have been communicating with visuals, such as pictograms and ideograms, for about 19 times as longer than with an alphabet. This might be an Egyptian hieroglyph, for example, which have more inherent value than, say, an ancient Greek letter. In essence, the pictogram on the left, an Egyptian hieroglyph for enemy foreigner, which, by the way, I find to be an interestingly realistic way of depicting that, has more intrinsic meaning than this block of translated Greek text that's on the right. Also, if you were to look at the development of a human within a span of their infancy and their childhood, it's clear that they're able to sense and interpret and understand the imagery that's around them far earlier than they're able to read, write, and communicate with whatever language they're brought up. Aside from these factors, studies have been done on the topic of desensitization, and it's been found that the consumption of overwhelming violent imagery can cause the part of our brain responsible for ethics and emotions to shut down, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex, which is also responsible for functions like blood pressure and heart rate, as well as morality and empathy. It's been theorized that this shutting down of this part of the brain was more useful for primitive humans as a method of self-preservation. But aside from all the historical and psychological stuff, there is just the logical assumption that pixels on a screen arranged in a certain way simulate human vision, which oftentimes results in the viewer being better able to communicate the information, being able to understand the information being conveyed. Back to our topic of humanitarian crises. I think that every humanitarian volunteer or activist out there who's campaigning for support for their cause keeps these factors in mind. Even so, every one of these volunteers knows the struggle that is getting people to care about their cause or getting people to donate to their cause. And as it turns out, there could be another factor causing desensitization. If you look back on the first example, the least effective one, I can pick out another reason it was so ineffective at drawing attention to the suffering it's referring to. The number 400,000 would have no different effect on the viewers than if I had used the number 400,001. It seems intuitive that the more people are suffering, the more humanitarian aid a cause should garner. But ironically, the opposite is true. The more victims there are of a humanitarian crisis, the less a person like me, scrolling through my newsfeed, could conceptualize and empathize with the victims, and the more our feelings of empathy are diluted. This psychic numbing, as it's commonly called, is caused by the immense volume of suffering conveyed by this statement, which is unfittingly represented by mere words. In this way, countless human lives are often portrayed simply as numbers on a screen. A single human life is insignificant among the enormity of the humanitarian disaster, causing those who contemplate helping the situation to feel more helpless, like their contribution means nothing, like trying to empty an ocean with a teacup. And so they are desensitized. But in actuality, that statistic represents 400,000 untold stories of strife and misery. Because of this, humanitarian advertisements also like to focus on the plight and day-to-day life of a single person affected by a crisis. By establishing a closer visual connection to a victim, the viewer experiences more reward in their desire to help. Back in December of last year, you might have seen this photo a lot of a migrant girl who died in U.S. Border Patrol custody. Those seeking to provide refuge for these migrants rallied around this photo when the tragedy went viral, and I'm sure it caused more activism and energy than the statistic from the previous slide would have caused. This principle is exemplified pretty well by exhibit number 2. You may recall this image of a Syrian refugee child from a few minutes back, and it roused significant awareness for the Syrian refugee crisis stemming from its civil war. It was effective in this way because first, it was an image rather than words and statistics, and second, it focuses on the tragedy of this one child and his family rather than trying to umbrella in the masses. And as a result, it avoids desensitizing the audience to excessive quantities of suffering parties. So, desensitization occurs due to the different mediums through which information is conveyed, and psychological instinct caused by repetitive and overwhelming human suffering. So what can we take from this? How do we use this information, and why is it so important to us? I think what's important for us today is to take the first step that's necessary to stop humanitarian crises from occurring. Now, this doesn't necessarily involve directly donating or volunteering, but I think the first step is simply awareness. By knowing and being actively conscious about humanitarian crises around the globe and our desensitization toward them, we could drastically reduce this effect. Further, we must not take what we are so fortunate to have, being in a developed country and having been raised never having to face war, persecution, or starvation for granted. I think this is something that's become too cliche in today's society, but it's so vitally important that we understand that we are part of a minority of people to have access to clean water, clothing, and shelter, as well as be able to exercise rights that are entitled to us at birth. In this way, you don't know what you have until you don't have it. Thank you.